Miss Tali Roth is one of the world's leading and most charismatic guitarists. Classical Guitar magazine calls her an extraordinary solo and chamber musician, and the New York Times calls her a marvelous classical guitarist. She is also the head of Juilliard's pre-college guitar department. Miss Roth, thank you so much for participating with us in the Beethoven 250th anniversary celebration. We have some questions for you. How did you begin to play the guitar?
So it's a real cliche story. I started with piano at the age of 8, and at age 8.5 I got a record of the passed away late guitarist Julian Bream, playing Mendelssohn Songs Without Words, arranged for guitar, and some Tarragam's workers, beautiful guitar classics, and I just fell in love. There's no other words. There was no guitar teacher in my little hometown, in my native Israel, and my parents had to find me a guitar teacher. My mom had to take me after work, and
How old were you at the time?
I was 8.5.
So that means you found classical music at the same time you found the classical guitar?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Wow, wonderful. And what attracted you to guitar as an instrument over all other instruments?
I think I just loved the way it sounded. I loved the way it felt. I loved the way my fingers caressed the strings, and I could actually feel the strings through the nails. And I loved the repertoire.
So then what makes a good composer of guitar music, of classical guitar, for example?
Classical guitar. So classical guitar is actually very varied. So we entitle everything under this umbrella. It could be even arrangement of folk songs. It could be real classical music, such as Giuliani that wrote for the guitar sore original 19th century guitar music. We have a lot of modern guitar music. I think what makes a good guitar composer is if the instruments does a great service to his music. So it has to have great music, and it has to sound great through the instrument.
So then who's the greatest guitarist or greatest guitar music influence on you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So of course, Julian Bream and Andrea Segovia was my biggest influence at the time. They actually made me want to become a guitarist, and I listened to their music. I even remember we had the siesta in the Mediterranean in Israel, and between 2 and 4 we couldn't really open the stereo, and I used to put it on volume 2 and just put my ear against the speakers. I was so in love I couldn't stop listening. So those were I guess my greatest influences as a child, as a teenager, and then some of my teachers later on. My wonderful teachers, Hubert Keppel in Germany, and of course my great teacher here, Sharon Espen, Oscar Gilia, took a lot of master classes with, and many others.
Well, you just mentioned Julian Bream, who just passed away. Do you have any comments on Mr. Bream's influence or the progress that has been made since his time?
We need a whole other interview just for that. But in short, he really was the greatest, one of the greatest masters of this century for the guitar. He arranged fantastic arrangements for the guitar. He also played a lot of originals in the most profound, original, lyrical, and just enchanting way. So he was a great inspiration for many guitarists, but also many musicians.
Well, we've heard you play a lot of also Spanish classical guitar music, a lot of Piazzolla and others. Can you comment on the classical music influence on Spanish guitar?
That's a great question, and not many people actually ask that question. And I actually think in order to play any music, you need classical music background, because it's all entangled, and someone that sits in one country is not immune to classical music influence, even though he writes in a folk style. For example, Isaac Albanese, that I play a lot of, he heard all the great classical musicians at the time, and then he transcended that into his own style. And of course, he eliminated the Spanish influence, the canto jundo, but more than anything, you can hear Bach in his music, you can hear Debussy in his music. So absolutely, I think all the great musicians, doesn't matter what style they write, and all, especially classical musicians that were in different countries, they were affected by classical music a lot.
Well, that gives our follow-up question, which is that Beethoven wrote quite a bit of music for the mandolin, but it's different from the guitar. Uh, does Beethoven's music translates or transcribes into guitar?
Yes, absolutely, and I think, of course, Beethoven is one of the greatest composers of all time. Sounds fantastic on guitar if we can absolutely play it. The biggest challenge for composers at that time is to think about the guitar as a solo instrument, because at the time it wasn't as projective. It didn't have the color variations. It didn't sound as good. So they were writing for piano. The mandolin was also louder. Mandolin also has the range of violin, so it was easier for a lot of composers to write for it. Also, it sounded louder at the time. But if we can absolutely bring out the greatness of the music of Beethoven on guitar, we will play it. And I'm humbly aiming to do that.
So there brings me the question of your choice of the Moonlight Sonata as a performance piece for the guitar. Please tell me something about what makes it one of the most suitable pieces to transcribe to.
So there's a lot of components that make something sound great on the guitar. One is, of course, if we can actually find a good key for it, because the guitar transposes not so good in some keys. So if we can find a good key that can play it on the guitar, that would be the first. And then if we can bring out the lyricism, which is probably the most important element of that music here, that you can actually have the melody with all those complex arpeggios and harmonic structure. So if you can actually bring out the melody on the guitar, we will play it. In fact, I am to play anything that I think sounds good on the guitar. So just, we have to work harder, that's all.
Well, what would you say to all the young people out there many of whom love guitar as an instrument because they hear often in other genres of music? What would you say to them in terms of learning the guitar as an instrument and classical guitar in particular, and classical composers such as Beethoven and others who you would never really quite think of as composers for classical music?
I have actually quite a few students that started with rock and came to the classical. I just say, if you love it, don't be afraid. Just there. If it doesn't, if someone prefers a certain genre of music, I think that's absolutely fine. I think that's great. But if they love the classical guitar, don't be afraid that you can't do it. You can do it. You can do whatever you want to do.
Now, classical guitar is significantly harder to learn to play than, say, other genres.
Yes, it demands a lot more technical skill. Both hands are working, all the fingers are working, a lot more concentration. It's not immediately rewarding, so you have to invest much more time into it. But I say love is the biggest tool of all. It's the biggest force that we have. If you love it, just do it.
That's great. So then what do you find to be the most important part of teaching music, and classical music in particular?
It's a great question, but it's a big question also, because it depends what you want it for. If you're an amateur and you want it for fun, that's one thing. If you want to give yourself a chance to be a professional, because I tell my students, nothing is guaranteed. No one is teaching you to be a professional. We just help you. We give you tools. So if you want a chance in becoming a professional, you have to work extremely hard. But what my philosophy is about teaching is, whatever you do, just invest yourself with as much as you can in the moment, because that's what's really going to make you happy. Even if you are not thinking about becoming a professional, invest as much time as you can, as much passion as you can, because eventually you are alone at home practicing after work or after all kind of other activities, and you just want to be happy. So it's the same philosophy for everyone. You have to invest as much as you can if you want to feel good about yourself.
That's a great answer. This year is Beethoven's 250th birth year. And we are obviously here talking to you because we are organizing this 24-hour International Beethoven celebration. Can you just say something about what you think of Beethoven and what you think of this celebration, and how it affects you, as for example, as a Israeli, as a internationally famous guitarist, as a musician.
I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing. I think it's admirable, especially in this COVID time situation. That is, everything is so much harder to do, produce, and it's very important for the world to have that kind of recognition, especially these days. I feel like really music and art are even more important right now, and celebrating this incredible composer in such a way can give a lot to people, can give hope, can give inspiration, can give strength, and I can only think about amazing things to say about it. So thank you for doing this.